Okay, so over the past few months, I've been making videos ranking every jutsu in each class. And today we're gonna be putting all of them up against each other by ranking them all in one video. There's over 100 jutsu to get through, so this might take a while. Before getting into it, I would just quickly mention that this is by no means the objectively correct list. It's most definitely not. Don't get me wrong, I tried to do research before making these videos, but at the end of the day, my experience while using these jutsu is what makes the biggest difference. So look at this more as just my own personal list. You're likely gonna disagree with me more than once in this video, and I think that's okay. Your opinion is no less valid than mine. Also, keep in mind that Shinobi Striker does a decent job at keeping all the jutsu somewhat viable, meaning that the difference between something at number 50 and number 20 isn't as huge as it might seem. Now, we have a lot of entries to get through, so without delaying any further, let's get into it. At the very bottom of the list is the Shadow Stitching Jutsu. This jutsu is, in my opinion, just way too hard to hit consistently. The only way to really do that is to use it within light attack combos, and even then, it doesn't really offer anything all that amazing. It just stuns the enemy for a bit and deals a little bit of damage. Plus, I just feel like the jutsu should be landing way more often than it is. It just sometimes feels like it goes through enemies for no reason. Next up, we have Summoning Great Snake. This technique is okay in base or flag battle, but it just takes way too long to summon, and it's easy to get interrupted while performing this jutsu. There's a lot of better ways to protect a base using the attack class, and that's why this jutsu is just so low on my list. Sticking with the base game summoning jutsus, we have Summoning Salamander. This jutsu basically has the same problems as the previous one. The only difference is that the salamander can poison the enemies while being around, which at least adds a little bit more utility in my opinion. Moving on, we have 8 trigrams palm rotation. Even though this jutsu stops almost every attack in the game, it unfortunately lags in all the other aspects. The damage you deal is very low and the area of effect isn't exactly large either, making this jutsu situational at best. There's just so many good jutsus in the defense class for protecting yourself, and there's no reason to really use this one. Up next on the list, we have Paralysis Jutsu. The biggest issue with this jutsu is the fact that you can't see the projectile. It's basically like an Amaterasu but without any indication of how close you were to hitting the enemy, which basically means that you can only use it effectively on stationary targets. Up next on the list is the Byakugan. It just personally feels like the vision part of this jutsu is not really useful. And while the attack boost is definitely nice, it's just not really enough to waste the whole jutsu space for, if you know what I mean. It's a real shame because in the anime, Byakugan is incredibly cool. Okay, next we're gonna have 3 very similar fire style jutsus, the first one being fire style flame bombs. Even though this technique gives you 2 projectiles, they both only deal 10% damage, meaning you won't be getting much done with them even with the super low cooldown. Next we have fire style Phoenix Flowers. The cooldown is a little longer at 10 seconds compared to the previous entry, but this jutsu also additionally disables the enemy's sub for 7 seconds, which is a pretty big benefit in my mind. Not only that, but the tracking is also pretty good, making it a bit easier to land. Finishing off the trio, we have Fire Style Phoenix Flame Scarlet Claw. Honestly, I wouldn't blame you for thinking this and the previous jutsu are the exact same, as they almost are, with the Scarlet Claw being a bit faster and giving the enemy a reduction in attack power for the next 5 seconds. But apart from that, it's basically the same as the last entry. Next up on our list is Earth Style Petrifying Jutsu. This is a decent technique for capturing objectives, but even though the regeneration is nice, there are just so many jutsus that are much better at the same thing, making this a bit forgettable. Not to mention, it's not exactly the most fun technique to use, as you can see. Okay, next we have the Shadow Possession Jutsu. This jutsu, unlike Shikamaru's previous technique, at least offers a pretty big reward for landing it, as you can not only deal damage by strangling the enemy, but also with follow-up combos. Nevertheless, it's only really useful in 1v1s, because your teammates will often otherwise interrupt it, not allowing you to do much. Coming in next on the list is Earth Style Mud Wall Jutsu. While I have changed my mind on this jutsu since my defense video, realizing this is actually okay in something like base and flag battle, since the wall explodes and deals damage, it is still just a wall at the end of the day, and I just can't bring myself to put it any higher. Following up is Wood Style Domed Wall, which is very similar to the last entry. I just feel like this one is pretty good for countering someone when they are trying to get to you, because it deals decent damage and has a wide area of effect when summoned, making it a bit better for me than the Mud Wall. Next up on the list is Partial Expansion Jutsu. This is a decent offensive tool for when you're surrounded by more than one player. That being said, it doesn't deal enough damage in my opinion and isn't incredibly easy to hit. It does have a different variation if you are in the air though. Nonetheless, it still doesn't make this jutsu into anything amazing. Moving down the list, we have Leaf Whirlwind. Personally, my least favorite taijutsu in the game, as even though it's a decent engagement tool, it lags in comparison to basically all the other taijutsus out there, in both distance covered, damage, and potential for continuing your combo with follow-up light attacks. Continuing on is Ice Style Icicle Swallow. The stun on this is nice, but the main problem with this jutsu is the fact that there is no tracking whatsoever, meaning that it can sometimes feel like it's up to chance if the icicles will connect. Not to mention, the backflip you do while performing this jutsu can be a bit annoying and inconvenient, at least for me. Let's move down onto our next entry, Summoning Toad. As base game summoning jutsus goes, this one is alright, as the Toad can at least shoot out water projectiles, meaning that it can be a little bit annoying. That being said, I highly doubt it's going to cause anyone an incredible amount of trouble. Next up on the ranking, we have Rasengan, a very simple close range jutsu that in my opinion just kind of severely lacks in damage, especially for an attack type. It is pretty easy to hit and can even be utilized as a bit of a movement tool, making it a decent pick for beginners. Up next on the list is the Heavy Boulder Jutsu. This is okay when, for example, fighting in survival battle, as it makes it quite a lot easier to catch and combo enemies. Nonetheless, in other game modes, there's just a better alternative in my opinion, that being Earth Style Super Weighted Boulder Jutsu, which we'll get onto later. Following up is Particle Style Atomic Dismantling Jutsu Pillar. This jutsu is just okay in my opinion. The damage is pretty low and it also isn't the easiest to hit, but you can get multiple targets. The best part is probably the fact that it breaks things like Sand Shield and Susanoo armor, making it a decent counter pick. Moving down, we have the Lighting Shuriken Net Jutsu, an actual decent stun that breaks through super armor. That being said, it does only travel in a straight line, and there is also a bit of a delay before you launch the beam, making it a bit difficult to sometimes pull off. Up next on the ranking, we have Wood Style Silent Strangle Jutsu. This jutsu is very similar to Lighting Shuriken Net for range types. It's unblockable and can be subbed out of either, but it does have a bit of a shorter cast time than the net. It's a decent stun that can be well utilized if you have a good attack to follow it up with. Not much more to say though. Next up is Nervous System Rupture. Even though the effect of this jutsu is a bit annoying at first, experienced players will not have many issues ignoring it, meaning that it basically just becomes an okay damage dealer. The tracking isn't bad, but the damage isn't really anything compared to even other jutsu in the same class. Moving down the list, we have the Resent Shuriken. This is a decent mid-range attack as the tracking isn't perfect, but it also doesn't take too long to activate. It deals good damage but should mainly be used as a surprise attack, as it can be pretty easily interrupted if the enemy sees you and is close enough. Moving swiftly on, we have Cherry Blossom Clash. This jutsu isn't necessarily bad as it has some positive effects that come along with it. For example, disabling the enemy's sub for a little bit. That being said, it is kind of frustrating trying to land it. The tracking on it doesn't always make much sense as you can be logged onto someone but the jutsu won't target them, making it feel a little inconsistent. In the next part of the list, we have the little version of the previous jutsu, Crimson Drizzle. To be completely honest, the difference between this and the previous entry isn't big, apart from the fact that one is a bit smaller and seals away the enemy's sub for longer. I just prefer using Crimson Drizzle for whatever reason, it weirdly feels more consistent. No detailed explanation here, just kind of my gut feeling. Next up is definitely the best non-DLC fire style technique, that being the original Fireball Jutsu. This is just a better version of Flame Bombs. It's bigger, deals more damage, has better tracking, and even though the cooldown is also larger, it's definitely much more of a reliable jutsu to use in the midst of a battle. Up next, we have Murderous Bone Ash. Even though this jutsu recently got a buff, it still feels a bit underwhelming to me. I know that the health draining property isn't super noticeable, but it just seems like I'm only throwing a kunai. The jutsu isn't particularly hard to hit though, as even if you miss it, it teleports to a different spot and gets redirected, making it much easier to land. Next up, we have Lightning Blade. This is a really viable close to mid-range attack and deals good damage too. It doesn't give you super armor though, so it can be pretty easily interrupted. That being said, it is also pretty decent for moving the flag around the map. Coming down the list, we have the left-handed version of the previous pick, Chidori. This and Lightning Blade are very similar, basically being almost the exact same thing. I just prefer Chidori for whatever reason, it's just more of a memorable jutsu, that is my only reasoning. Let's continue with the next entry, Spiked Human Boulder. This is mainly good as a movement tool for flag battle, though you should stick to using it on flat maps mostly. It can deal good damage when you, for example, push someone against the wall, but it's too inconsistent to be used for that in my opinion. Following on the list is Amaterasu. This jutsu is really good if you manage to land it, but that is unfortunately its biggest downside, as trying to hit a moving target is nearly impossible, meaning you'll have to reserve this jutsu on the enemies that are mostly stationary. That being said, landing does inflict a very nasty burn on the enemy, making it still worth it in certain cases. Moving on, next we have Mind Transmission Jutsu. This jutsu actually deals quite a lot of damage and isn't all that hard to hit. The biggest problem though is that your teammates will often interrupt it before you can activate the second part, basically rendering it useless in team fights. You have to make sure no one is around you when you're using this, otherwise it becomes a bit obsolete. Moving down the list, we have the Acrobat Technique. This jutsu is pretty decent at protecting you from a single attack, while also allowing you to deal quite a lot of damage to players chasing you. That being said, it's a little too situational for me to be a stable pick into most game modes within the game. Moving down the list, we have a ranged jutsu, that being Vanishing Rasengan. Even though it doesn't exactly travel very fast, I still think this is probably the best base game ranged ninjutsu attack types have, as it doesn't take at all long to throw and also deals decent damage too. Plus, the invisibility factor makes it at least a bit hard to anticipate. Up next on the list we have Universal Pull. This jutsu is definitely viable in game modes such as base battle or flag battle, but nowadays there are probably better tools to achieve the same thing while also dealing damage. Nonetheless, still a very fun jutsu to use. It never gets old seeing enemies helplessly fly towards you, just a joy. The next spot on the list belongs to Toad Oil Bombs. The best part of this jutsu is definitely the fact that it seals away the enemy's ninjutsu for around 10 seconds, which is pretty neat for sure. Otherwise though, the damage is a bit lackluster even for a defense class jutsu. Continuing on is Sand Shower. Its main use case is being in defending objective, as it not only deals damage but also slows down enemies, making it pretty annoying to deal with. It can be pretty difficult to get out of for the opponents. Nonetheless, I would stick to mainly using it in game modes where you're protecting some sort of objective. Moving down the list we have another taijutsu, Leaf Flash. Once again, it's great for combos and has a really low cooldown, allowing you to chain it with basic attacks. All of the taijutsu are pretty similar in my opinion, but this one feels a little bit easier to land compared to Leaf Whirlwind, earning it a better spot on the list. Up next we have the other jutsu Rock Lee provides, Leaf Rising Wind. This is basically the same as the last entry, it just knocks the opponent into the air, making it a little easier to combo in my opinion. Apart from that, the jutsu is basically the same, with a marginally bigger cooldown. Alright, moving down the list we have the Octopus Hug Jutsu. This attack deals little damage but most importantly stuns the enemy for a bit, allowing you to continue dealing even more damage. It's a decent stun in my opinion, but the damage is just too low, especially for the attack types, who need as much damage output as they can get. Let's continue on to our next entry, Lava Style Dissolving Jutsu. My biggest problem with this jutsu is how long it takes for the lava balls to fall down, as they are incredibly slow, making it pretty easy to dodge them. This jutsu is still viable in base and flag battle, but hitting the right spots also isn't super easy, so you'll have to learn how to properly do that if you want to get the most out of this technique. Moving down the list we have True Seeking Scorch. Even though this jutsu definitely deals a lot of damage, it's just way too inconsistent a hit in my opinion, as if the enemy moves even a little bit you will not be able to get them. Yeah, you can move the beam a bit, but it won't make a huge difference. Moving down the list we have Angelic Advent. It's a great jutsu for moving around the map as you keep the wings for quite a while. That being said, your only option of attack is to throw a kunai at the opponent while in the air, which while being okay for supporting your allies won't deal much damage. This jutsu also leaves you quite open, if anyone can get to you, that is. Moving down the list we have Tsukuyomi. This jutsu's biggest problem is similar to Amaterasu. You can basically only hit stationary targets with it, meaning that it's not exactly a reliable attack. Once you do hit it, it's actually pretty good, as you can chain it with light attacks, but yeah, you definitely have to be patient with this one. Okay, let's move on to our next entry, Hidden Jutsu 1000 Needles of Death. This is a good technique for defending objectives and can be well comboed with something like Heavenly Hand Power. Outside of that, it falls a little bit flat. Thankfully, its low cooldown means that you can place it quite often in a game, even having two puddles placed at the same time. Moving on with the ranking, we have Ninja Art Needle Jizo. This jutsu doesn't last very long unfortunately, clocking at around 4 seconds, making it a bit unreliable while defending objectives. It also has quite a few counters that can nowadays pierce it, making it a bit less viable than it used to be. Not to mention there are just jutsu in the defense class that achieve a better result. Up next on our list is Shikigami Dance Shield. This is one of the longest stuns in the game, not to mention it can stun multiple opponents and also has a very low cooldown. The only problem is that it's pretty difficult to hit sometimes, as the shield travels very slowly, meaning that you will most likely have to force the enemy to step into it if you want to stun them. Continuing on is Fire Style Hiding in Ash Jutsu. This is probably the best way in the game to escape deadly situations, while also being great for carrying the flag or contesting, and I mean only contesting bases, as you cannot capture them with this technique. Apart from that, it does stun enemies if you come out of the ground very close to them, but it doesn't happen too often. The next spot on the list is occupied by Earth Style Subterranean Voyage. This technique basically has the same properties as the last entry. It's mainly good for getting around the map and contesting bases, as you cannot capture them with this jutsu once again. The only reason why it's a bit higher is because it also heals you for 5%. Following up is Tornado High. Even though this jutsu is a bit risky as it leaves you wide open during the launch part of it, I still think it's worth it, as overall it deals around 30% if everything hits. Plus, it also allows you to continue your combo with follow-up light attacks if you time it correctly after the tornado. Okay, let's move on to our next entry, 8 Trigrams Air Palm. Even though this jutsu doesn't exactly deal massive damage, the effect it provides makes it very useful. It's basically like a ranged version of Chakra Scalpel. The tracking also isn't bad, and added with the invisibility, it isn't at all hard to hit this jutsu pretty consistently. Let's move on to our next spot, occupied by Magnet Style Gold Dust Great Burial. This is a pretty good jutsu if you're playing on an even map without many obstacles, cause if the wall runs into any of them, it just crumbles away. That being said, it is pretty big and hard to get away from once you get caught by it. Plus, it also allows you to do other things while it's moving. Next up on our list is Onyx Chidori, which is just a buffed version of the normal Chidori. It has a much shorter recovery time while also being quite a bit faster than the original. Added onto the fact that it also disables the enemy's sub for a bit after the hit, it does though have basically twice the cooldown, that being the main reason it's not higher. Up next is Super Beast Scroll Lion. This is still one of the fastest projectiles jutsus in the game, making it very easy to hit enemies with it, since it also has really good tracking. The damage isn't anything amazing, but it's perfect for enemies who are low on health and who you just need to quickly finish off. Moving on, we have the other Super Beast Scroll jutsu. This time we have the Beast variation. Both of these jutsu are very similar. I just think that the screen cover ink that this jutsu applies to the hit enemy is much more of a pain in the ass to deal with compared to the speed debuff, even though the jutsu does have a slightly bigger cooldown. Moving down, we have Earth Style Super Lighten Boulder Jutsu. This jutsu doesn't only come in handy in flag battle but can be surprisingly good in team fights, since you give your allies quite the advantage with all of the different stat boosts everyone on your team gets. Plus, its wide range makes it very easy to apply to everyone. Next is Earth Style Super Weighted Boulder Jutsu, which does the exact same as the previous jutsu, just this time it increases the stats for the enemies. These two entries could be interchangeable, I just think the debuffs are a bit more valuable for whatever reason. Okay, so continuing on, we have Multiple Striking Shadow Snake. This jutsu has both a short activation time and a low cooldown, added with the fact that the range is pretty good for a close range attack and you have a decently reliable way to not only damage your opponent but also poison them. Moving down the list, we probably have the only summoning jutsu in the game I'd consider using, C2 Dragon. Unlike other summonings, this one actually I kind of vibe with. The projectile it shoots out are pretty good at hitting the enemies and deal decent damage too. Moving further down the list is Water Style Water Dragon Jutsu. This jutsu has one of the shortest activation times in the game, making it very versatile. That being said, the 14-second cooldown bumps it down a few spots for me personally. Just a bit too long I think for only around 20% damage dealt. Alright, let's move on to the next pick, which is Fire Style Flaming Meteors. A good jutsu for fighting near any objectives or in a team fight. It's basically like a support turret. It also sometimes forces your opponent to lock onto the clone, making it an even better distraction. It's not super hard to evade it, but it is still annoying. The next entry on the list belongs to Summoning Slug, which as far as summoning jutsus go, actually isn't too bad. It's a pretty good jutsu for not only recovering your health, but also doing the same for your teammates. But stick to mainly using this in base battle. Coming up next on the list is Water Style Shark Bomb. This is one of the better base game jutsus for dealing damage that defense types have, as even if the shark doesn't connect while circling around you, it is still likely to hit when being fired off. Plus, it also resets the enemy's ninjutsu stocks on hit, making this one of the more consistent damage dealers in the class. Next up is my favorite taijutsu technique in the game, dynamic entry. It's a very fast jutsu with a really big range too, making it probably the easiest to land out of all the taijutsus in the game. Not to mention, it's also an instant guard break that gives you a defense boost, just the perfect quick engagement tool. Moving down, we have a Shinobi Striker staple, Sand Shield. This jutsu was very good at the release of the game, but it has since become less viable due to the sheer amount of counters this jutsu has. Chances are someone on the enemy team will be able to break it, nevertheless it's still very useful for base battle. Moving on to our next entry, we have Summoning Blade Dance. This is a decent projectile with good tracking and pace. The activation is a little too long for me though. It feels pretty easily interrupted, but the fact the weasel reappears makes it a good way to have a backup plan when going into 1v1. Following up is Fire Style Burning Ash. This is in my mind a great jutsu with one issue. It's sometimes a real struggle to activate the second stage, where you ignite the ash on fire causing an explosion, as there's sometimes a weird delay between when you can actually use it. Apart from that, when you can pull the trigger, it's a really good AoE attack. Next up we have Earth Style Earth Dragon Bullet. It takes a little while to summon but gives you super armor and also doesn't have a health bar, so it cannot be destroyed. If placed well, it can be very annoying to deal with in both flag and base battle, not allowing enemies to capture the objective. Following on is Water Style Severing Wave. This technique has the potential to deal quite a lot of damage to multiple opponents if used at the right time, since it can cover quite an area in front of you. That being said, it's pretty easily dodged if you can just jump over it, meaning it's best used in team battles and when the opponents are already occupied. Let's move down the list to our next spot, which is occupied by 1000 Hands. It's basically the same as Orochimaru's Snake Jutsu, just this time you also get the opportunity to fly around for a bit, which is always a plus. Otherwise, it's basically the same thing. Moving down, we have the Wood Dragon Jutsu from Hashirama's arsenal. This attack is almost instant when you use it, which in my opinion is its biggest upside. Apart from that, you should also mainly stick to using it from mid to long range, and it can be sometimes a little bit unreliable from closer distances. Alright, following up is Inferno Style Flame Control. This is basically like a moving Amaterasu that also deals more damage and is in my opinion easier to hit, making it definitely a viable choice, especially considering the fact that it's a base game jutsu. Next up on the list we have the Teleportation Jutsu. The obvious use case of this jutsu lies in the flag battle, where it's one of the best tools you have for carrying the flag, as the cooldown and activation on this jutsu are incredibly low. On top of that, this is also a great ninjutsu for dodging some attacks that are otherwise almost impossible to not get hit by, such as Majestic Destroyer Flame. Even though this is a base game jutsu, you still see it being used by a lot of players, and there's a good reason for that. Continuing on, we have Cellular Activation. This is by far the best jutsu in the game for healing the user, as using this alongside a healing tag can basically get you to full health, making it very hard to kill you. That being said, it obviously doesn't help out your allies much, apart from keeping you alive that is. But still, you'd ideally like to heal your teammates too. Moving on, we have the Flying Raijin Jutsu level 2. First of all, this attack is obviously incredibly cool. Secondly, hitting the kunai is actually pretty easy. By far the worst part of this jutsu is the fact that even when you hit it, the enemy can sometimes still get away. But to be honest, it doesn't happen enough for me to not love this jutsu. It also deals a lot of damage, even for an attack type. Moving down the list, we have the Palm Sage Jutsu. This technique can actually provide a big amount of health back to everyone. You just have to keep your allies close and make sure nobody hits you, which is obviously easier said than done. This jutsu would probably be higher if it wasn't for Ino's healing technique, which is very similar but better, I think. Following on is Chakra Scalpel. The reason why I have this above 8 trigrams air palm is the fact that even though it's a close range attack, it's incredibly easy to hit. The tracking and the cover distance couldn't be much better honestly, meaning that you're gonna be landing this more often than not. It also deals a bit more damage and seals away the jutsu just for a little longer. No incredible difference, but still. Following up, we have Lightning Style Lariat. I personally like this jutsu more than Lightning Blade as it deals more damage and has a longer travel distance. That being said, the wind up on it is longer, leaving you more vulnerable before the attack, but you do get super armor. Nevertheless, for a base game jutsu, this is one of the more consistent damage dealers in my opinion. Continuing on is Fire Style Dragon Flame Bomb. This is just a decent projectile that only moves in a straight line, but due to its speed and width, it isn't at all a problem to hit enemies. So if you're looking for a decent little range attack for your defense class build, this jutsu is probably a good way to go. Following up on the list is Boruto Stream. This is the ultimate counter-attack jutsu, as it's basically like a combination of a sub and a Rasengan, doing the best of both. It's best used in something like defending the flag or a base, but it can be used elsewhere too. Not to mention, you don't actually have to wait for someone to hit you, and you can just activate it at any time. Next up on the list we have the Laughing Buddha Jutsu. This is an awesome jutsu for base battle, as the most reliable way to catch someone with it is if they are stationary, because otherwise they can just move away. Nevertheless, this jutsu deals massive damage, and it even allows you to hit multiple opponents at once. Following on, we have Limbo Border Jail. This is a great way to sneakily protect objectives, as enemies will not anticipate you being surrounded by invisible clones. That being said, I would probably stick to using them to protect yourself mainly, as standing them with the enemy is not so reliable. Okay, following on we have the Piercing One-Fingered Thrust of Hell. This is a jutsu that I honestly don't see being used enough. It gives you super armor while charging, deals good damage, and has an incredibly long range for a close range attack that allows you to snipe enemies that are far away. The only issue with this is that you are prone to absorbing some damage while charging it. Next up on the list is Lightning Style Thunderclap Arrow. This is another jutsu that is mainly great for either flag or base battle, as not only does it have two stages that both deal damage, but it can also destroy things like Sand Shield, being a perfect counterplay to that. In other game modes, it does fall a bit flat though. Moving on, we have Snake Thrust. This is still one of the most straightforward but consistent damage dealing jutsus in the game. It can be a bit hard to hit moving players, as the jutsu has no tracking whatsoever, but it's fast enough where you can work around that. And 30% damage is a lot for defense types, making this jutsu still very viable. Next up we have the second jutsu of Mitsuki's arsenal, Ripple. Very similar to the last entry, but this time you additionally pull the enemy towards you instead of pushing them away, which is actually why I have it a bit higher, as it allows you to deal even more damage with subsequent light attacks. Apart from that, it's basically the same. Moving down, we have Karma Linchpin Strange Taste. This is basically the ultimate counter to many annoying jutsus like Sand Shield or Water Pillar, as it just instantly removes them. But it obviously doesn't deal any damage, making it just a utility tool. Nonetheless, if you want to get as many ultimates in the game as possible, this is the way to do it. Continuing on with our list is Heavenly Hand Power. As cool as this jutsu is, it does have a limited number of situations where it is useful. Amazing for things like flag battle and base battle, less so for combat battle, even though you can still use it as a surprise factor. That being said, there's a lot of really cool combos with this technique, like the one you're seeing me use with Haku's Puddle, which is why I still love this jutsu. Moving down the list, we have Green Rain Ground Hold. This is kind of like an upgraded version of the slug. The area is a little bigger, and even though it doesn't last as long, clocking it around 10 seconds, it just comes with much more utility. Plus, the added super armor you get as the user is a huge benefit too. Continuing on is Cross Lantern. Even though the cross shape may feel a little bit awkward at first, this jutsu is by no means hard to land. And in a crowded area, basically guarantees you to deal a bunch of damage to multiple enemies. Probably one of the better AoE attacks in Shinobi Striker in my opinion. Following up is Sand Tsunami. This technique sort of suffers from the same issue as the Gold Dust Wall. It's very good on even ground, but can be sometimes frustrating to use on certain maps. That being said, if you manage to use it on a flat map in the midst of a team battle, it can deal massive damage to the enemies and cause a lot of trouble for them. Continuing on with our list, we have Water Prison Jutsu. This is a great way to isolate someone and get them out of the game for a little bit. Plus, you can also combo another jutsu with it, since you basically get a free hit. Your allies can cancel the prison though with just a basic attack, so you have to watch out for that. Okay, moving down the list, we have Kamui Lightning Blade. This is probably the best technique out of the Chidori-like jutsus out there. Not only does it deal a little bit more damage, but it also lowers the enemy's defense for the following 7 seconds. Added with the invincibility, you can't really go wrong with picking this jutsu. Next up on the list is Wind Style Great Breach. This is one of the simplest ranged jutsus in the game. It's very fast, deals good damage, and even goes through walls. Not to mention, it has really good range and can hit multiple people while also breaking guard and penetrating things like Sand Shield and Water Pillar. Just a really reliable technique. Up next is Sand Coffin. This is kind of like a range version of Water Prison Jutsu, with the additional benefit of allowing you to not only deal damage by activating the jutsu again, but also by hitting the coffin a bit before, as it doesn't immediately break, allowing for some fun combos. Let's move on to our next entry, Strength of 100, Flower Cannon. This jutsu can often go unnoticed as it doesn't really do anything super obvious, but the buff has quite a wide area, meaning that you can basically instantly give all of your teammates a huge advantage in a team fight, which when it comes down to it is exactly what you want from a healer. Moving down, we have Sukuna Hikona, God Hunter. This is just a really good engagement jutsu, as you're completely invulnerable while performing this technique as it puts you into a shrunken state. It deals decent damage on its own, but most importantly allows you to deal even more with follow-up basic attacks. Moving down the list, we have 8 trigrams Hazan Strike. The best part of this jutsu is the fact that it pretty considerably decreases the secret technique gauge of the enemy, which allows you to get it in a full combo even after the attack is done. This attack will just straight up stop OP ultimates from getting used. It provides immense utility in that sense. Up next on our list, we have Detonating Clay, Twin Birds. The best part of this jutsu is how incredibly persistent the birds are in their pursuit, meaning that they will chase the enemy for quite a while before they disappear. Not to mention, they deal a lot of damage for a range type, making this one of the best base game range jutsus in the game. Continuing on, we have Sage Art Shadow Style Thunder Blast. This jutsu is very good for a base battle as you can easily deal a bunch of damage and stun a bunch of opponents. The fact that you get super armor while using it also makes it quite hard to stop you once you get started. Alright, coming up next we have Might Guy's Youthful Roar. This is one of my favorite stuns in the game, as it's very fast and the range is very good too. The stun itself isn't the highest, but it's big enough to give you a chance to strike. Not to mention you can obviously stun multiple people with it at once too. Moving down the list, we have Gentle Fist Technique Body Blow. This is basically like a better substitution jutsu. I might be putting this just a bit too high, but I think it's criminally underrated, as it not only allows you to cancel the enemy's attack, but also gives you a big opportunity to strike back immediately. It also cancels out super armor and can destroy both Sand Shield and Water Pillar. Up next is Kamui Climax, which just simply makes you invulnerable for 5 seconds. This jutsu is great for both flag and base battle, as it makes it quite a bit easier to capture or contest the desired objectives. That being said, I think it's not as good as Kamui Bond that range types have, since you're probably not gonna be able to carry the flag as a defense type. Let's move on to our next spot on the list, which is occupied by Kamui Bond. This does the same thing as the previous entry, but I think it's more useful in the hands of the range class, as you're faster and will be able to, for example, carry a flag with much more ease than a defense type. Continuing on is Chikushara. This is the ultimate surprise jutsu, as the jutsu makes you almost completely invisible, making it pretty hard to see you and most importantly unable to be locked onto. Secondly, the fact that you get an attack boost makes it so that you can create some combos that become more deadly with the use of Chikushara, or use it for some ultimates that aren't one-hit kills. Following up, we have Baryon Tailbreaker. It's similar to Susanoo armor, even though it's not the perfect defense by any means. But on the other hand, it's amazing with helping you when you're on the attack and in combos. The only annoying part is that it's pretty easy to cancel accidentally and you also cannot use ninja tools while using it. But in skilled hands, this jutsu can be devastating. Up next, we have the iconic Flying Raijin Jutsu. This is obviously a great technique for a flag battle, as you can get a big head start after capturing the flag. That being said, it can also be used as a second substitution, you just have to place the kunai before entering a battle. Moving down the list, we have the Strength of 100 Hard Light Jutsu. This is in my opinion a pretty underrated jutsu, as getting 8 seconds where you can basically do whatever you want as a healer is incredibly valuable. Not only will you be able to use your healing tag and the second ninjutsu you have to heal your team, but also get a bit of damage in yourself. Continuing on, we have Karma. This is just a reliable way to deal damage while also dodging other attacks. And the speed buff isn't exactly bad either. The 2-stage activation means that you can wait for quite a long time before you activate the second stage and fly behind the enemy kicking them, allowing for some cool combos. Up next on the list, we have Water Style Water Pillar. This is basically the heal class equivalent to Sand Shield, with the added damage. But honestly, I much prefer it to the before mentioned jutsu, as it also has the ability to knock and damage enemies back, furthering its utility. Obviously, it still has many counters though, so just keep an eye out for that. Let's continue with the next entry, Flying Raijin Slice. This is honestly one of the most reliable close range attacks in the range class. Not only is this jutsu very fast and pretty easy to land, it also deals 1.5 times as much damage if the enemy is not locked onto you while you're performing this. Which not only is a cool gimmick, but also very good as a surprise incentive. Following up is Demon Hunter. This technique is honestly just a really consistent attack that deals decent damage and has quite a long tracking distance, also giving you super armor in the process. It's not as overpowered as it used to be a few years back, but still a great choice for defense types. Next in line is Iron Sand Unleashed. This is one of my favorite AoE attacks in the range class, as not only is it a great way to deal damage to everyone, but also a great way to poison them. The projectile isn't super hard to hit either, meaning that more often than not you'll get your money's worth on this jutsu. Further down the list we have 80 God's Vacuum Fists. This is simply a very reliable close range attack that heal types have at their disposal, as you get super armor while performing it, meaning that it basically cannot be interrupted. Plus it also holds the enemy in place for quite a while, and combined with the good damage you have an attack that's always useful. Let's now look at the next entry, Heavenly Foot of Pain. Even though this jutsu recently got a bit nerfed, it's still definitely the best option out of the smash the ground jutsus, simply because of the tracking and the area of effect. It's definitely the most consistent of the three, and amazing in team fights. Following on is Inferno style Flame Lighting. This jutsu is amazing for flag battle, as the distance from which you can pull an enemy towards you that's stealing your flag is very large. It does have a pretty long cooldown of 18 seconds though, but let's be real, there's no way you're not gonna be having a blast while using this jutsu. Following up next, we have Kurama Twin Impact. This is one of the better AoE attacks in the game for attack types, as it's super easy to fire off quickly and the range on it isn't exactly anything to scoff at either for a close range jutsu. Use this in a crowded teamfight and you'll deal a decent amount of damage to anyone around. Moving down the list, we have Doikakuten Shokatsu. Even though the tracking on the stake isn't anything amazing, this is still an incredibly consistent hit and the damage isn't too bad either. Not to mention that if you manage to hit it, it's pretty hard to get out of. It's the perfect technique for finishing off players with low health. Okay, our next entry is Susanoo Tsukumo. This is once again a technique that really shines in both flag and base battle when trying to protect the base, as not only does it make you basically invulnerable, but also allows you to redirect all the incoming damage towards the enemies. Obviously, the smart players will know not to attack you, but let's be real here, not every Shinobi Striker player is that knowledgeable. Following up, we have Truth Seeker Orbs Cycle. This is the perfect jutsu for protecting yourself, and you can even contest flags and bases with it. The second part is also a pretty reliable damage dealer. The only problem with this jutsu is that you can't do much while in the orb, meaning your teammates will have to survive without you. Next entry on the list belongs to Flying Thrust Heavenly Hand Power. Okay, I'll admit maybe the rank for this jutsu is a bit high, but you can't argue the fact that this is one of the coolest jutsus in the game and incredibly fun to use. Not to mention, it's super reliable too, and it also allows you to dodge jutsus that are otherwise really hard to dodge, like Majestic Destroyer Flame for example. Continuing on, we have Mind Transmission Palm Sage Jutsu. In terms of pure healing, this jutsu offers the biggest amount of potential health back. That being said, you are completely immobile while using it, meaning that you need to fully stay out of battle in order to not be interrupted, making it not a super fun move to use. Otherwise, it's obviously very good, as long as you have teammates that you can actually rely on. Moving on, we have Adult Naruto's first jutsu, Rasen Rampage. This is a great attack and deals really high damage too. The only problem is the deceptively shorter range, as the arms can extend quite a distance but not always connect. Apart from that, it just tears enemies to shreds honestly. Moving down the list is Wind Scythe Jutsu. This jutsu is amazing for team battles, as even though it may seem like the jutsu can be hard to hit, the opposite is true, as the small twisters cover quite an area and they have a bit of tracking on them too, and it's by no means hard to hit multiple enemies. The damage in total is also not small, and even though the cooldown isn't the shortest, this jutsu is still definitely worth it. Okay, moving further down the list, we have Genjutsu Sharingan. This jutsu might seem kind of OP, but it doesn't last as long as a normal Sharingan, and the high cooldown of 25 seconds makes it more balanced than it might seem at first glance. Nonetheless, it's still a huge buff for your entire team in my opinion. Following up is Scientific Ninja Tool Reversed Scale. This is an incredibly reliable attack, as even if you miss the first part, the secondary one still gets activated. It's also pretty easy to chain them together, since the first hit resets the opponent's substock and also breaks things like Sand Shield. Let's continue with our next entry, that being Uchiha Flame Formation. This is one of the best defensive jutsus for protecting everyone in the game, but under one condition. You need a coordinated team to get the most out of this jutsu, because using this without one just leads to you mostly protecting only a few people. Up next is Hidden Jutsu Sukuna Hikona. This is in my opinion the best defensive eye technique in the game, as it's just like a better Sharingan. It gives you so much more protection, not only from projectiles but also from close range attacks. Not to mention, it allows you to attack back too. Up next, we have probably the most versatile jutsu in the game, Uchiha Shuriken Jutsu Oburugurama. This jutsu is incredibly viable, but it does have a little bit of a learning curve, as you don't want to call the shuriken prematurely, but apart from that, it's just awesome. It would honestly take me a while to list all of the utilities this jutsu provides, which I think says enough. Up next on the list we have Flying Raijin Guiding Thunder. This is one of the best support type jutsus in the game, as not only does it stop enemy projectiles, but it also boosts your team's attack and defense, meaning that being in the dome basically gives your team a huge advantage in any game mode, and especially in something like combat battle. Up next we have a very powerful jutsu, the Sharingan. It's the perfect jutsu for any 1v1 fight, as it gives you a huge advantage before the battle even begins. Also obviously great for something like flag battle, but not as effective in something like base battle, as summing away while capturing a base isn't ideal. You might be questioning why I put this above Sukuna Hikona when I said that's the best defensive eye technique, and the answer to that is honestly just the incredibly low cooldown of Sharingan. Up next on the list is Vanishing Rasengan Full Moon. This is an incredibly versatile ranged jutsu, as you can either charge it up to deal massive damage or fire it off quickly to finish off kills. It also gives you super armor while charging it, making it very hard to stop the attack once you get started. Following up, we have Cellular Extraction Jutsu. As simple as this jutsu is, it's still one of the most reliable heals in the entire game, as it has a really short activation time, good range, it removes negative effects, and has a pretty low cooldown too. It's basically like another but better healing tech, which is exactly what a lot of heal types need in their arsenal. Continuing on, we have Almighty Push. This is one of the best jutsus for both flag and base battle, as it not only provides incredibly useful utility in pushing everyone away, but also brings decent damage to the table, which is pretty rare to see nowadays. Next up on the list is Shurado, which completely changes your base ninjutsu arsenal. The great thing about this jutsu is the fact that you can spam the attacks with no cooldown, and added with the fact that they by no means deal small damage makes this a very deadly jutsu for range types. Moving down the list, we have Susanoo Armor. Even though this definitely isn't the perfect defense, it's still the only jutsu to provide such armor while also allowing you to continue attacking or doing anything really. Due to this fact, it's not only useful in base and flag battle but also in combat battle, since you can just safely deal damage yourself. Up next, we have Uchiha style Halo Dance. This is one of the best combo jutsus in the game and it is incredibly easy to land. It's some of the best guaranteed damage in the game, as landing it means the enemy cannot escape after the first hit. If finishing off kills is something you struggle with, then this is definitely the jutsu for you. Moving down the list, we have Flash Slice. This jutsu is not only a good way to get some good damage in, but also offers you a huge opportunity to continue comboing your enemy due to them bouncing off the ground, granting you the ability to deal huge damage with just one attack. Let's move on to our next entry, Celestial Air Slipe Type 0. This is the best area attack the defense class has, and probably in the entire game, as you are completely invulnerable during the combo and the enemies have no way to get out of it. It doesn't deal massive damage, but can significantly slow down the enemy team in whatever they are doing. Up next, we have probably the best offensive jutsu for heal types in the game, Yasaka Beats. This is everything you could want from an offensive jutsu, as you're invulnerable while using it and it has amazing tracking and damage. To be honest, even outside of this class, this is one of the best offensive jutsus out there, and that's why it's so high on this list. Next is what I believe to be the best range type jutsu in the game, Fire Style Majestic Destroyer Flame. This is one of the easiest ways to deal massive damage in the game, as it not only gives you super armor, but it also is incredibly hard to dodge. It does have a long cooldown, but it's still definitely worth it, as it also inflicts burn for 10 seconds. Next is in my opinion the best heal class jutsu, Sixth Path Chakra Rebirth. This is currently in my opinion the best healing jutsu in the game due to its recent buff, as now the area of effect is better and the recovery amount bigger. It also boosts your allies' defense, just the ultimate support jutsu for the midst of a battle. And finally, at number 1 we have Baryon Bullet Barrage. This is the ultimate close combat jutsu. It deals amazing damage and provides incredible utility. If you land every punch, you're gonna be dealing around the 40% damage mark. Coupled with the fact that you can also decrease the enemy's secret technique gauge, makes this jutsu in my mind currently the best in the entire game. And that's finally it, all the jutsus ranked. As I said at the beginning, this is just my list. It isn't meant to be the ultimate meta list. Also, ranking the jutsu from different classes amongst themselves is kind of hard as they often serve completely different purposes. Nonetheless, let me know in the comments what you guys think of the list, and what you agree or disagree with. This video honestly took a while, so a like would be greatly appreciated. I will see you all soon. Bye!